The Visayans are a Philippine ethnic group native to the whole Visayas, to the southernmost islands of Luzon and to most parts of Mindanao. They live primarily in the Visayan island group, in many parts of Mindanao and southernmost parts of Luzon. They are speakers of one or more Visayan languages, the most widely spoken being Cebuano, closely followed by Hiligaynon and Waray-Waray. Many have, at some point in their lives, migrated to the other parts of Luzon out of economic necessity brought about by centralization around Manila. They comprise the largest ethnic group in the country, numbering at around 33 million as of 2010. Terminology. Visayan refers both to the Visayan people collectively and the lands they have inhabited since prehistory. The anglicized term Visayas is commonly used to refer to the latter, the Visayan homeland, or the unofficial pre-colonial Visayas spans the following present-day Philippine provinces: Mimaropa, Bicol Region, Palawan, Romblon, Masbate, Western Visayas, Aklan, Anti-Capiz, Iloilo, Guimaras, Negros Island Region, Negros Occidental, Negros Oriental, Central Visayas, Siquijor, Cebu, Bohol, Eastern Visayas, Leyte, Southern Leyte, Biliran, Sama, Northern Sama, Eastern Sama, Zamboanga Peninsula, Zamboanga del Norte, Zamboanga Sabugay, Zamboanga del Sur, Northern Mindanao, Misamis Occidental, Misamis Oriental, Camiguin, Bukidnon, Caraga Region, Agusan del Norte, Agusan del Sur, Dinagat Islands, Surigao del Norte, Surigao del Sur, Davao Region, Compostela Valley, Davao del Norte, Davao del Sur, Davao Occidental, Davao Oriental, SOCCSKSARGEN, Cotabato, Sultan Kudarat, South Cotabato, Sarangani. According to H. Oliver and other anthropologists, the term Visayan was first applied only to the people of Panay and to the settlements eastward in the island of Negros, and northward in the smaller islands, which now compose the province of Romblon. In fact, at the early part of Spanish colonialization of the Philippines, the Spaniards used the term Visayan only for these areas, while the people of Cebu, Bohol, and Leyte were for a long time known only as Pintados. The name Visayan was later extended to these other islands because, as several of the early writers state, albeit erroneously, their languages are closely allied to the Visayan dialect of Panay. The impression of these similarities was in fact carefully analyzed by David Zorc, who, while able to linguistically classify the Austronesian subfamily termed Visayan languages, noticed their overall connections as one dialect continuum. These should not, however, be confused as dialects, given the lack of mutual intelligibility. Gabriel Ribera, captain of the Spanish Royal Infantry in the Philippine Islands, also distinguished Panay from the rest of the Pintados Islands. In his report regarding a campaign to pacify the natives living along the rivers of Mindanao, Ribera mentioned that his aim was to make the inhabitants of that island vassals of King Don Felipe, as are all the natives of the island of Panay, the Pintados Islands, and those of the island of Luzon. History. Classical period. The earliest settlements in the Visayan Islands were from valley-dwelling Austronesians and highland-dwelling Negrito dated around 30,000 BC. These early settlers were mostly animist tribes. In the 12th century, Hindu-Buddhist descendants from the late Vijayan Mandala, Majapahit and Brunei settled the islands. By the 14th century, Arab traders and the followers who ventured into maritime Southeast Asia converted some groups to Sunni Islam. Visayans practiced a mixture of Islamic, Hindu and Buddhist beliefs, although there were also groups that were varied. Some groups exclusively practiced Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism. There is also evidence of trade and immigration between other Asian peoples in the area as early as the 9th century. The Tumandok or Sulid-known people of the mountainous region of Panay Island are the only Visayan group to maintain pre-Hispanic Visayan culture and beliefs, due to the geographic isolation from lowland Visayan groups, although dismissed as a hoax due to some content modifications. A compilation of transcriptions by Pedro Alcantara Monteclaro known as the Maragtas attempts to retell the origins of the present-day Visayan people based on folklore revolving around 10 datus of Borneo. It was said that they originated from an area within the Visayan Mandala during the early 13th century, in an attempt to escape the despotic rule of Raja Makatuna and the subsequent dissolution of the Mandala. The chieftains, led by Datu Puta, fled eastwards to what is now the island of Panay. The island at that time was ruled by an 80-eyed chief Marikuda, who was later given a golden sadok and a necklace for his wife Manawantawan, in purchase of the Borneans of Panay for new settlement. It was said that the name for the inhabitants, Bisaya, was derived from the polity of origin, Rivijaya. The Visayans first encountered Western civilization when Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan reached the island of Cebu in 1521. The Visayas became part of the Spanish colony of the Philippines, and the history of the Visayans became intertwined with the history of the Philippines. With the 3 centuries of contact with the Spanish Empire via Mexico and the United States, the islands today share a culture tied to the sea later developed from an admixture of indigenous lowland Visayans, Han Chinese, European culture in the Philippines and American influences. Spanish colonization. The 16th century marks the beginning of the Christianization of the Visayan people, with the baptism of Raja Humabon and about 800 native Cebuanos. The Christianization of the Visayans and Filipinos in general is commemorated by the Atiatahan Festival of Aklan, the Dinagyang Festival of Iloilo, and the Sinulog Festival, the Feast of the Santo Niño de Cebu. The brown-skinned depiction of the child Jesus given by Magellan to Raja Humabon's wife, Hara Amahan. By the 17th century, Visayans already took part in religious missions. In 1672, Pedro Calungsod, a teenage indigenous Visayan catechist, and Diego Luis de San Vitores, of Spanish Friar, were both martyred in Guam during the mission to preach Christianity to the Chamorro people. By the end of the 19th century, the Spanish Empire weakened after a series of wars with its American colonies. The surge of newer ideas from the outside world, thanks to the liberalization of trade by the Bourbon Spain, fostered a relatively larger middle-class population called the Ilustrados, or the Enlightened Ones. Quote, "This then became an incentive for the new generation of educated political visionaries to fulfill their dreams of independence from 3 centuries of colonial rule." Some prominent leaders of the Philippine Revolution in the late 19th century were Visayans. Among leaders of the propaganda movement was Graciano Lopez Jarana, the Ilonggo who established the propagandist publication La Solidaridad. In the Visayan theater of the revolution, Pantaleon Villegas led the Cebuano Revolution in the Battle of 3 de Abril. One of his successors, Arcadio Muxalom, is a prominent general in the liberalization of Cebu. Earlier in 1897, Aklan fought against the Spaniards with Francisco Castillo and Candido Aban at the helm. Both were executed after a failed offensive. Martin Delgado and Juan Araneta led the rebellion in neighboring Iloilo. With the assistance of Anacito Lacson, Negros Occidental was freed. The latter would be called the Negros Revolution of the Cinco de Novembre. The other half of Negros was rallied by Diego de Levina. Movements in Capas were led by Esteban Contreras with the aid of Alejandro Balgost, Santiago Belicillo and other Ilustrados. Meanwhile, Leandro Locsin Fulon spearheaded the liberalization of antique Most of these revolutionaries would continue the fight for independence until the Philippine-American War. There was also a less heard and short-lived uprising called the Igg Beome Revolt, which occurred in Igg Beome, Antique, steered by Maximo and Gregorio Palmero. This revolt, however, was secularly motivated, as they clamored for a more syncretic form of religion based on Visayan animist traditions and Christianity. Federal state of the Visayas. At the peak of the Philippine Revolution, anti-colonial insurgencies sprung from Luzon up to the Visayas. Despite military support from the Tagalog Republic led by Emilio Aguinaldo, Visayan revolutionary leaders were skeptical toward the real motives of the Tagalogs. Such ethnic animosity was notable to the point that local Visayan leaders demanded forces sent from the north to surrender their armaments and were prohibited to leave revolutionary bases. Moreover, this apprehension led to the full declaration of the federal state of Visayas on December 12, 1898. This short-lived federal government, based in Iloilo, was an accumulation of revolutionary movements across Panay and Negros. The following were the elected officials 4 days prior to the declaration. The federation was immediately formed upon the merger of the cantonal government of Negros, the cantonal government of Bohol, and the provisional government of the district of Visayas, which included Romblon. It was said to be based on American federalism and Swiss Confederacy. Despite the skepticism towards Malolos, the Visayan government proclaimed its loyalty to the Luzon-based republic while maintaining their own governance, tax collection and army. Apolinario Mabini, then the Prime Minister of the Malolos Republic, convinced the Visayan leaders that the Malolos constitution was only provisional and that the governments in Visayas and Mindanao were promised the power to co-ratify it. American colonization. After the 1898 Treaty of Paris, the American colonial government saw the integral part of indigenous elites, particularly in Negroes, in local affairs. This was a different move compared to the previous Spanish imperialists, who created a racial distinction between mestizos and native Austronesians. As such, this paved the way for a homogeneous concept of a Filipino, albeit initially based on financial and political power. These said elites were the hacienderos of the landed, capitalist class concentrated within the sugarcane industry of Negros. The Americans' belief that these hacienderos would be strategic elements in the political hold within the newly acquired colony bolstered the drafting of a separate colonial constitution bound for the sugar industry elites. This constitution likewise established the Negros cantonal government. This ensured that the island of Negros would be governed by an indigenous civilian government, in contrast to the rest of colonist-controlled areas, governed by the American-dominated Philippine Commission. During this period, the islands of Samar, Leyte and Biliran were directly governed by the Malolos Republic through Vicente Lucban and later by Ambrosio Mejica. Meanwhile, prior to the full abolition of the federal government on November 12, 1899, Emilio Aguinaldo appointed Martin Delgado as the civil and military governor of Iloilo on April 28, 1899, upon American invasion of Antique. The federal government, much to its rejection of the Cebuano leaders who supported the Katipunan cause, was dissolved upon the Iloilo leaders' voluntary union with the newly formed First Philippine Republic. Other factors which led to Aguinaldo forcing the Visayans to dissolve their government was due to the Federation's resistance from reorganizing its army and forwarding taxes to Malolos. Modern age. Since Philippine independence from the United States, there have been 3 Philippine presidents from the Visayan region: the Cebuano Sergio Osmeña, the Capuznon Manuel Roxas, and the Boholino Carlos P. Garcia. In addition, the Visayas has produced 3 vice presidents, 4 Senate presidents, 8 speakers of the House, 6 chief justices, and 5 presidential spouses, including Imelda Marcos Awary. The then-President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo is also half Cebuano. Rodrigo Duterte has Cebuano roots, but he grew up in Mindanao. In international diplomacy, the Visayas has produced a United Nations Under-Secretary-General, the Negros Occidental native Rafael M. Salas, who served as the head of the UNFPA. In the lines of religion, there have been 2 Visayan cardinals, namely Julio Rosales from Cebu and Jaime Sin from Aklan. The first Visayan and second Filipino that was canonized is Pedro Calungsod. Throughout centuries, non-Visayan groups, most notably foreigners such as the Chinese, have settled in predominantly Visayan cities in Visayas like Bacolod, Cebu and Iloilo, and Mindanao such as Cagayan de Oro, Davao and General Santos. These Filipino-Chinese have been assimilated to mainstream society. One factor would be the limited number of Chinese schools in the Visayas, which help maintain the Chinese identity and a stronger sense of a distinct community. Many of them, particularly the younger generation, have been decultured from Chinese traditions, share values about family and friends with other Filipinos, and do not write or speak Chinese well. Meanwhile, Negritos, locally called ATI, have also been assimilated into mainstream Visayan society. Visayans have likewise migrated to other parts of the Philippines, especially Metro Manila and Mindanao. The Visayans have also followed the pattern of migration of Filipinos abroad, and some have migrated to other parts of the world starting from the Spanish and American period and after World War II. Most migrants are working as overseas contract workers. Language. Ethnic Visayans predominantly speak at least one of the Visayan languages, which are commonly referred as Binisara Bisaya. The table below lists the Philippine languages classified as Visayan by the Sama Institute of Linguistics. Although all of the languages indicated below are taxonomically classified as Visayan, not all speakers identify themselves as ethnically Visayan. The Tausug, Moro ethnic group, only use Bisaya to refer to the predominantly Christian lowland natives, which Visayans are popularly recognized as. This is a similar case to the ATI, who delineate Visayans from fellow Negritos. Conversely, the Visayans of Kapil in northern Sama speak Abanon, a Sama-Bajor language, as the native tongue. 1 Philippines only, 2 Philippines only, 1,022,000 worldwide.